Joining us to discuss this further is Madeline Summerville, Democratic strategist and attorney, and we have Angie Wong, Republican strategist and political columnist. First of all, good afternoon to you both. Madeline, let me start with you. You heard what House Speaker Mike Johnson said. Democrats are threatening the safety of Americans. What is your response?
Yeah, I think that that's a bold characterization and an untrue one. Actually, FEMA is still operating. All of the emergency functions of FEMA are still operating. TSA agents are still coming to work, and they are entitled to get back pay for when they come back. So everything that he's saying is a severe over-exaggeration, which doesn't surprise me, because the last time that we had a government shutdown, the answering machine at the White House said that the Democrats were responsible for this because they insisted upon giving healthcare to illegal immigrants. I think that the rhetoric that's coming out of the Republicans from the White House is beyond frustrating, and they would do well to start telling the American people the truth.
Angie, let me go to you now. Your response, and what do you say to House Speaker Mike Johnson saying that he's confident that this partial shutdown will end on Tuesday? What do you think about separating DHS from the larger funding package?
Yeah, I too am very hopeful that all of this will be over in the next couple of hours. I think as soon as the House reconvenes, and they will pass this pretty quickly. Now, there's been a lot of back and forth on whether or not DHS is going to get defunded, and that's the rhetoric coming from the left. Here's the truth. The big, beautiful bill finances a lot of DHS's and ICE operations for the next 3 to 4 years. So there's going to be zero chance that any of these operations will actually stop. Maybe after that, yes, there's going to be some funding cuts, but for now we're safe. So as Madeline said, FEMA is still working. TSA is still working. They're not getting paid. Coast Guard, same thing. But do you want all of these emergency services to stop, especially when we're having record low temperatures across the nation? We need to make sure that these are well financed, that they're ready to go in case there are real emergencies. We already had 14 people die in New York City because of the cold. We need to be able to ensure that no additional Americans are harmed due to these low temperatures, and also any other emergencies that we may have that, are just around the corner. So I think the games have stopped. I think after Tuesday, hopefully all this will be done, and then we'll move on to the next fight.
Okay, so Madeline, what do you think about the idea about separating DHS from the funding package to avoid a broader shutdown?
I think it's a really smart tactic. I think it's a way for Democrats to be able to say, we can address the possibility of people blaming us for having the shutdown by taking care of them, by making sure that all of these programs like Social Security or food stamps are funded, and refrain from having the kinds of problems that we had in the last shutdown. So I think it's very smart. The problem is, in these next 1 or 2 weeks when they're going to be negotiating DHS funding, what Angie said is absolutely right? A lot of the program is funded through the big, beautiful bill. However, these appropriations are still needed. And so the problem is actually within the Democratic Party, the Democrats are split, because some people like AOC want ICE to be abolished. And some people like Chuck Schumer probably want common sense immigration reform. And that is a big thing to have to work out within the Democratic Party in a very short period of time. And it's really difficult for Chuck Schumer in particular because he is facing a challenge from AOC. And so much of the base right now is leaning way left. So I think the problem might actually be coming from inside the House.
Okay, Angie, so what I think is different about this shutdown, at least slightly, and worth pointing it out, is that Johnson publicly has said President Trump is leading the push for this bill and that it's his call to do it this way. How are you reading that?
I'm not reading that at all. I think Mike Johnson has been out, as of yesterday, he's been on all the Sunday morning shows pushing for this to be over already. Look, the American public, we do not want to go through another government shutdown. We did that. We had the longest government shutdown in history back in November. We don't need another one. We just want the government to run. We want them to do whatever they have to not interrupt our lives. And I think that it can be accomplished, but there are political games being played, and from both sides. Okay, we're all accountable in this, but the reality is that this should be a seamless process. Already, you have the Senate pass the bill. We need to throw it back at at Mike Johnson to get it done, and I think he has the support. He's already rallied up all the Republicans to get it going. The only pushback that he's seeing is that Anna Luna Paulina wants to make sure that the SAVE Act gets in there next. Okay, we'll do that after this is passed. But I think by midweek, this should be resolved. And then we'll have more time to fight for, other causes.
Okay, so Madeline, Angie says she's not reading that. Am I overreading it that President Trump is leading this? You tell me.
I think that when it comes to President Trump's involvement in policy matters, he's the one reading things, right? He's the one reading the room. I've never thought that President Trump was an ideologue. He wants to give the people what they want. And I think right now the president is hesitant because people aren't necessarily sure what they want. And the polls are not reflecting that. I just talked about people not being sure within the Democratic Party, but on the Republican side too. And I think the way that actually President Trump was able to win the election was because he won over so many independents and swing voters. I think right now those independents and swing voters do not like what DHS and ICE are doing. I think they're not responding positively at all. The polls are indicating. And so I think that he's stuck in a position to where he has his advisors telling him continue to do this immigration, and he has the far right people who I believe that he's interacting with on a consistent basis, telling him to keep going. But he knows that that's not what the people who ended up electing him want. So it's a rock and a hard place on all sides.
So Angie, Madeline mentioned multiple opinions within the Democratic Party and perhaps debate within the Republican Party. So I want to ask you, what is the Republican consensus on DHS? Because House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries indicated to Speaker Johnson that he won't be able to rely on Democratic votes. So, Johnson may have to try to get virtually all of his members on this vote.
Yeah, I think Tom Homan said it best last week, which is ICE operations are not stopping. We're here to do our job and enforce the law. And I never could really wrap my brain around why anyone would push back on just simple law enforcement. And that's what we're seeing play out on a very dramatic scale here. So I think those things will continue to go on. Now, Tom Homan and President Trump are also wise enough to know the optics of this and understand the politics beyond the ground operations that we're seeing. And it is very, very clear that Republicans did not have a stronghold on what was going on the ground in Minnesota with the shootings, and we didn't win the optics on that. I hate to say it because 2 people are dead, but the reality is both sides need to be held accountable for how we politicized all of this. One thing I do want to mention is that, here in Florida, and certainly speaking with my friends in Texas, we have far more ICE arrests here than in Minnesota. It is minuscule compared to Minnesota because our government actually works with ICE and works with the federal agencies. So you don't see the protests. You don't see the shootings. There's nothing. In fact, it is a clean, peaceful transfer to federal custody here. So I think that, if we can emulate that in other states, we're going to be just fine. But it's just, unfortunately, everyone's got a cell phone. Everyone wants to create a little bit of drama in their city because they oppose the Trump administration, period.
So, Madeline, what do you say to that? What do you say to the argument that ICE is simply carrying out the president's promise on immigration, which the American people voted on?
I'd be happy to address that. I think that the fact is that there are specific policies that are coming from the Trump administration that we have documented. For example, one from May 12th, one from June 14th, that are being adopted in different parts of the country and not in others. And I can't imagine another reason besides wanting to escalate things. For example, ICE agents in Minneapolis, we've seen dozens of reports of this. And like I said, there was a directive from June 14th that said that if someone is filming you as an ICE agent, that constitutes doxing, and that doxing puts your safety at risk. And so you are allowed to use whatever means necessary to stop them. That would explain why, when there was a woman who was standing off to the side before Alex Preddy stood in front of her, just filming, right? Why that ICE agent went out of his way to come over and push her. That's what started the entire incident. And so it's issues like that, where it's directives like that, where it pits the American people and ICE agents against each other on purpose, because we all know that filming is a First Amendment right and that it's been protected by courts everywhere, including the Supreme Court. So these are specific directives that are coming from. And also, I just actually discovered this morning, instead of allowing people who have applied for asylum to stay in their homes, they're coming to arrest them because you're allowed to detain them technically until their court date, but they're not giving them any notice of that. And we've never followed that policy in the past because it's just cruel if it's a person who's following all the rules. But so they're deliberately surprising people, but because people are living by the law, and ICE is being taught something different. So I don't know where they're in all the places they're applying this, but I know that it's escalating things because we're getting two different messages from two different sides.
Angie, your comments.
Well, I mean, if ICE agents are able to detain them, that is by law, right? So it's not like it's cruel. I don't think they decide what's cruel or what's not cruel.
Notice.
And maybe there was provided. We don't really know the full situation of that. But here's the thing. ICE agents shouldn't even be doing arrests. They're not allowed to do arrests. It's the local PD that has to do the arrest. But when your mayors and your governors are telling PD to stand down, do not work with federal agencies, well, guess what has to happen? ICE has to kind of step in and fill in that gap. And I think that is where the problem really comes around, is that you have to have law enforcement work with law enforcement, not against each other. And I think we're seeing all of this because of the leaders that be pitting law enforcement against law enforcement. And nobody wants to see this. This is a terrible, terrible situation. I'm very happy that Tim Walz actually called President Trump to say, okay, how do we do this? Because everyone's got to bring everything down. And we've seen it over the weekend. Yes, there were still protests, but yes, you can definitely see the temperature is brought down by a lot. But now we also see the theatrics of it, the circus of it happening in the government shutdown, which is that Chuck Schumer and others are trying to use this ICE controversy to do a partial shutdown of the government. So, I think it's all been exposed at this point, what this was all about, really, which is to create a narrative just enough for Chuck Schumer to sell it to the senators to say, no, we don't want to pass this one additional appropriation bill because ICE funding is in it. I don't think that's a great message. Clearly, American people, we don't even want to see it. We don't want to hear it anymore. We just want to work in government.
Well, all right, let's just leave it there. I am hopeful that things will calm down in Minneapolis because President Trump said he had a great conversation with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, so I'm hopeful for that. All right, thank you both for speaking with us today.
Thank you.